Okay, mathematicians, lesson number 6. Here is the question reading for the Green Book math pages. Hop this guy out of here and hop this guy in. We see that. Yeah, not too bad. Okay, so here we are, page 230. We'll start with that. And it says, write a decimal for each point marked on the number line. The first decimal is written for you. Okay, so we know 0 doesn't count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're talking tenths, so they wrote, it's hard to see the point here, but it's 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, blah, 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 blah. Which decimal is equal to 1/2? Well, if you watch the lesson, that should be easy. So 1/2 is equal to what decimal? Fill it in there. Question number 2. Use the number line in question 1 to say whether each decimal is closer to 0, closer to 1/2, or closer to 1. Right? So which of these 3 points is the decimal closer to? 0.2 is closer to, fill it in. So all of these say is closer to, and it has the decimal at the beginning. 0.6 is closer to, 0.9 is closer to, 0.4 is closer to, 0.8 is closer to, 0.1 is closer to. Question number 3. Use the number lines below to compare the numbers given. Write the crocodiles, the less than or greater than crocodile, between each pair of numbers. Okay, so remembering that the crocodile wants to eat the biggest amount of number. So here's the number line, so you can find the two numbers. So 0.4, you might want to write in some of these numbers, all of these numbers, number lines for you. We've got 0.4 and 1/2. Figure out which one is bigger. It's closer to the right, it's bigger, and that guy gets the open crocodile mouth. Number 4, which whole number is each decimal or mixed fraction closest to? 0, 1, 2, or 3, right? So those are all the whole numbers. So 1.3, is it closest to 1 or closest to 2? Find it on the number line, figure out which one it's closest to. 1.9 is closest to, is it closer to 0, 1, 2, or 3? 2 and 2/10, is that closest to 2 or 3? Okay. Right. Okay, so here we are on page 231. Write the numbers in order by first changing each decimal to a fraction with a denominator of 10. Note, show your work below each number. Okay, so in the boxes, they're asking you to write them as a fraction with 10 as the bottom, right? So you're figuring out how many tenths you've got. Then on the line, for those 3 numbers, you can see where it has A and B here. So you might find it easier to kind of block that off for yourself. So for just those 3 numbers, first write them as fractions with 10 on the bottom, and then figure out which one is, it says in order. So we're going to assume we're going to start with the smallest number, smallest, medium, biggest number. Okay, write those on the line. Ooh, they're being sneaky. Some of these are bigger than 1. Okay, number 2, Karen says, to compare 0.6 and 0.42, I add a 0 to 0.6. So 0.6 is the same thing as 6/10, which we know is the same thing as 60/100, which we can write as 0.60. Then it's easy to see that 0.60, 60/100, is greater than 42/100. So 0.6 is greater than 0.42. So what they're asking is for you to put a 0 for each of the decimals that are just a tenth. It says add a 0 to the decimal expressed in tenths. So these guys that only have 1 digit here, you're going to put a 0 after each of those. Then circle the greater number in each pair. So between 0.70 and 0.52, which one is bigger? Okay, circle the big one. Question 3. Write each decimal as a fraction with denominator 100 by first adding a 0 to the decimal. So this is kind of like the first part of what you just did up there. So 0.6 would be 0.60 or 60 over 100. Question 4. Write the numbers in order from least, so the smallest number, to greatest or the biggest number, so smallest first, by first changing all of the decimals to fractions with denominator 100. Okay, so in the boxes, you're going to change them to a fraction with 100 on the bottom, and then on the line, you're going to write the smallest, medium, biggest one. Same thing. And again, you might find it easier to cover it up so you can just focus on one question at a time. Okay, one page left to go. You got this. Okay, so now we're looking at page 232. Move that down a bit. There we go. Okay, so now they've given us a cake, and it says shade 1/2 of the squares. So they've conveniently drawn a line at half, so you can pick whether you want to shade the bottom, so the bottom or the top, you pick. Write 2 fractions and 2 decimals that mean the same amount as 1/2. So for our fractions for 1/2, you're going to figure out how many tenths and how many 100ths, and then you're going to write 2 decimals that match the same amount of stuff that you have shaded in. For the next cake, they say shade 1/5 of the boxes. So they've drawn lines to separate it into 5 equal spots. Write 2 fractions and 2 decimals that are the same amount as 1/5. Fractions, 1/5 is equal to how many tenths and how many hundredths. And then for the decimals, what would be the 2 decimals that would show that amount of cake? Number 7 says write equivalent fractions. Remember, equivalent, fancy way of saying equal or the same amount of stuff. So if you've got 2/5 now, how many tenths would that be? How many hundredths would that be? Same thing for 3/5 and 4/5. For question number 8, now they're cutting up the cake a little bit differently. Shade 1/4 of the squares. Write a fraction and a decimal for 1/4 and also 3/4. So the first line, you're going to write a fraction for 1/4 and a decimal. The next line, what if you had 3/4 of it? So you could look at the part you haven't shaded in, that would be 3/4. Figure out how many hundredths that would be, and then write it as a decimal. Question 9, circle the greater number. Their hint, first change all fractions and decimals to fractions with denominator 100. Okay, so they've taken 1/2 and they've changed it into a fraction here. So you could take 0.37 and also turn it into a fraction that has a decimal 100. And then, once you've filled in the boxes, for each pair, you're going to circle whichever one is greater or bigger. Number 10, still see that? Yeah. Write the numbers in order from least to greatest. It says to explain how you found your answers. I'm not worried about that so much. You could, though, show me what decimals they are or what fractions they are, whichever you feel easier comparing. Okay, so from least to greatest. So we've got 0.7, 0.32, and 1/2. You're going to write the smallest, the medium, then the biggest one. Okay, and then do that for these 3 numbers and then these 3 numbers. Again, if you get stuck on anything, make sure you let me know and we can set up a Skype or a Zoom in-person lesson where we can actually try things while we're able to talk back and forth. Okay, happy mathing. Good luck.